Welcome back, and a very special welcome to our wonderful, regular duty expert, Gordon Chang. When it comes to matters involving China, the Western Pacific, the free world more generally, there's nobody better. Gordon is, of course, the author of, among other things, The Coming Collapse of China, an essayist of great renown, notably these days at places like the Gatestone Institute and Newsweek. He is also, of course, a man to be followed closely at Twitter at Gordon G. Chang, which I'm proud to do. Gordon, it's always good to have you with us, sir. Welcome back, especially on a very, very busy day in your agenda.
Thank you so much, Frank.
Let's start with what broke the news this morning, which was the president once again, when directly asked the question, will the United States defend Taiwan in the event of an attack by China, said, without hemming or hawing, without a lot of caveats, yes, we will. Now, there was some talk, both by him and most especially by the White House subsequently, that seemed to kind of reinsert a little bit of that old strategic ambiguity, as it's called. What are we to make of where we stand at the moment, do you think, and how the Chinese are perceiving it?
Two things, Frank. Clearly, the president wants to defend Taiwan. He believes it is our commitment, as he said. And this was not an isolated statement. He said this to George Stephanopoulos last year. He said it to Anderson Cooper at that town hall on October 21st of last
Right.
year. And he said it now. So clearly, that's his instinct. But in all three of these instances, the White House has walked back that statement. And whatever one thinks of the commitment to defend Taiwan, and I think that's a terrific thing the president has said, there is this disarray in the administration. And the Chinese are going to look at that and probably think that they can get what they want because they don't believe that the US will, in fact, defend Taiwan. This is a dangerous moment. And I think that the administration needs to come clean on this, say in a way which is unambiguous, which is not contradicted, what its policy is. Because if we don't do that, then I think the Chinese are going to look at this and think that the United States is incapable.
Or at least irresolute. Gordon, we had a program last week featuring members of this very important uh, product from the Center for Security Policy. I think you're familiar with it, Stopping a Taiwan Invasion. Dr. Stephen Bryan was on the program. We had also a webinar sponsored by our Committee on the Present Danger of China, in which strategic ambiguity was really one of the foremost recommendations that has to be dispensed with in favor of, well, basically what the president said. And more to the point, backing it up with some specific concrete actions. I guess if we've learned anything from the Ukraine debacle, it is you want to protect people, arm them, give them the capability to defend themselves before they're attacked, not after the event. Your thoughts on that general
Well,
proposition?
yes, strategic ambiguity worked, but it only worked in a benign period, and we're no longer in a benign period. So we do have to move to strategic clarity. And I believe the President of the United States should do a number of things. First of all, he should get behind the Resolute desk in front of a TV camera and say, the United States will defend Taiwan. And he should also say that the United States will offer a mutual defense treaty to Taipei if it wants it, that we are willing to recognize Taipei as Taiwan if Taipei wants it, that we are willing to ship weapons on an emergency basis to the island, and that we should base American troops there as tripwire. In other words, what we do in South Korea, which has worked in 7 decades in a far more dangerous situation than the one in Taiwan. If we do that, we can maintain peace and stability. And one thing, Frank, especially now with the war in Ukraine, we cannot afford another war on the other side of the Eurasian landmass because that really means the end of peace and stability everywhere.
Right. So deterrence needs to be shored up, and I think your recommendations, Gordon, make a lot of sense. They're very much consistent, I think, with the thrust of these recommendations from a really distinguished expert panel, including uh, former commanders of the U.S. Army, Navy, Air Force and Marine forces in the Pacific. I'm very proud of this. Um, your point about engaging and really endorsing Taiwan as a sovereign nation, unfortunately, has been further um, sort of, I think, moved at arm's length by a decision by the administration in the context of this new trade pact. The Taiwan will be dealt with bilaterally, but not in this sort of multilateral context. Talk a little bit about that, Gordon. The nature of this trade pact, how it relates to the so-called Trans-Pacific Partnership, and specifically the advisability or inadvisability of leaving Taiwan out.
Yeah, the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework is not in. It does cover trade issues like, for instance, labor standards, environmental standards, supply chain resiliency, but it doesn't deal with market access. So it's not a full trade
Mm-hmm.
pact, and therefore it sort of lacks a lot of specifics. Now, I would have liked to have seen Taiwan invited to be a member of it.
Gordon, let me ask you about another diplomatic fandango that's underway in the midst of all of this in Asia. The president will be meeting in the course of the day today, as we're speaking, with members of the so called Quad. Uh, this would be Japan and India and the new prime minister of Australia, uh, so newly minted that he basically had to rush from, I guess, his election victory party off to be at the Quad meeting. Um, give us a sense of what the lay of the land is now with respect to this group, what it possibly could mean in terms of that idea of deterring aggression against Taiwan, and also this new prime minister. What do we know about him in Australia?
Yeah, the Quad is really important, and it is bipartisan. It is one way to contain China, and Australia is part of it. Now they've got a Labor government, first one in 12 or so years. We don't know what their policies are going to be. I tend to think that they'll be same as the previous government, because Anthony Albanese is moving towards the center on defense policy. But the question is going to be the AUKUS Pact, the pact among Australia, the United States, and UK, for, in the first instance, the production of nuclear powered submarines. So there's a lot that we really don't know at this point, Frank. You know, in terms of the Quad, though, it is almost not so much a question of local politics as really the Chinese pushing everybody together. There would have been no Quad were it not for Beijing's provocative policies. So that means that countries that might waver in normal times, I think, are going to be fully on board. And that, of course, includes Australia.
Two quick questions, Gordon. Is the Labor Party opposed to this submarine deal? And secondly, is India among the countries, obviously, that is pulling alongside? Do you think that that would be so, including in the case of an attack on Taiwan?
There have been murmurs in the Labor Party that they didn't like the AUKUS Pact, but I don't think that that will actually affect policy. But that's just a mere guess. At this point, I don't even know if the Party knows what it's really going to do. With regard to India, India has, of course, been squishy on Ukraine. But when it comes to matters on China, there's no question about it. I mean, there are Chinese troops on Indian controlled territory. That really defines things. China killed 21 Indian troopers in 2020. So there's no question that India, when it comes to China, is all in. And I'd expect India to support Taiwan.
You would. Well, that's very heartening because obviously having that major power on the subcontinent of Asia aligned with us, not just in sort of the abstract, but in a very practical way, has to bear on Chinese calculations. And again, this was another important recommendation out of this expert panel study, Gordon, was the vital need to present China with a united front on the part of various allied nations, including, of course, Taiwan, rather than making it look as though either Taiwan is on its own or that the United States is not going to have its partners. Gordon, I think we're going to leave it at that for today. Thank you so much for your time and Godspeed, my friend. We'll talk with you soon. Next up, we'll be speaking with the great Douglas Murray about the war on the West. That and more straight ahead.
Real America's Voice presents Water Cooler with David Brody.
If you're going to look into January 6th, I mean, there's a broader issue here, too, about some violence going on in other places.
Burning of cities, looting of cities, murder, destruction of personal and public property, assault on cops, assault on innocent civilians. You want to look at something, you should definitely be looking at that.
Don't miss Water Cooler, weekdays at 3 p.m. Eastern. America Shines with Aubrey Shines.
Here's a clip that has gone viral showing just how insane the transgender movement has become and how unashamed these people are. If you openly declare that you hold a Christian worldview on this matter, you will be called a homophobic, transphobic zealot.
Don't miss America Shines, Saturdays at 1 p.m. Eastern. Real America's Voice presents War Room with Steve Bannon.
People have legitimate questions. They want to see data. They want to see evidence.
Don't miss War Room every weekday at 10 a.m. Eastern.